This is the Dane Moore NBA Podcast, brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you from the Blue Wire Studios here at Vegas Summer League. And we got Timberwolves head coach Chris Finch. Thanks for taking some time, man.
No, man, appreciate you having me on board. I always walked by here, looked like a lot of important things going on. I wanted to be part of it.
It is this. This is different than looking at my face in here. This is not what a podcast normally looks like when I'm just recording it at home.
It's a beautiful studio.
Yeah.
Did you draw your own face?
I drew myself. Yeah.
We need to work on that.
Yeah. So this is your third summer league with the Wolves. I was thinking when you were overseas, like, were you coming back for summer league back then? Like, so how many summer leagues would you say you've been at now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I was trying to think about it the other day. I came to summer league when I was coaching overseas, to scout players.
Right.
Long before it became what it is now, which is this incredible event. All credit to the league and Warren Legary, who is really his brainchild. When I first came, there would be maybe a couple hundred people in the gym, Thomas and Mac only.
Yeah.
And it was a phenomenal place to come and scout talent for overseas coaches. And it still is, but now it's a lot more madness to fight through if you're trying to evaluate. But I would say, man, it's got to be 25 years in a row. So people always ask, have you ever been to Vegas? And I say, yeah, every year for
Way
25.
Too much time in Vegas. It is the extended stay. I was thinking about that, and I'm like, I wondered if you came back for summer league or what that looked like when you were overseas. And it got me thinking about, I think you told me this one time, maybe when you were with Sheffield, that on your team you said like your best three players were all bigs on that team. And I was meant to ask you, like, how did you what did that look like, and how did you navigate that? Obviously that's on my mind with this roster now and bringing back Naz, and you dropped a little, maybe all three will play together line in that. But what did that look like, and what do you take from that experience then? A very different time, a very different league, but what do you take from it?
Yeah, so just to put it in proper context, and you're right, it was with the national team, the early days of the national team. And what it looked like was, it looked rough around the edges. But the difference was they were good, very good players, EuroLeague players, borderline NBA players. But for the most part, they didn't have the skill. But because just the size, the talent, the experience, we needed them out there. We played. It was Nick Nurse and I when we were working together, and we just said we got to find a way to get our best players on the floor. That's what this is all about. And we kind of ran like a triple post, like just kept flashing and replacing, flashing and replacing. And then one of them, which was Pops Mensah-Bonsu, who played in the league for a little bit. Yeah, Pops was actually good enough to move to the perimeter and play off the bounce a bit there. So we just played bully ball.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's not a lot to draw from that.
I was going to say,
to where you're trying to go right now.
Well, that's the difference, right? You said that with Naz, like, he is just so skilled as a big, and in so many ways outside of being 6'10" or whatever. He doesn't really play like a traditional big in that way, and then neither does Karl, right? And Rudy does. So it's, in some ways, it's like, it's all these bigs, but it really is a diversity of bigs, and that's why this can work.
Yes. I mean, the skilled big is the evolution of the game. We've seen the shooting, but it's like really the skilled big, which has changed everything. We're fortunate enough to have two of them. But the value of Rudy next to those guys is he gives you an anchor point, and that's what we have to do. Like, we have to be better at trying to find out the spacing next to that. I think in the league right now, when it comes to, positions, and you've probably heard me say this before, is like you really are what you're able to guard.
Right.
And so that's going to be the biggest challenge. Offensively, we can run sets. We can become more structured. We can be a little bit more, and we need to be a little bit more on point with our spacing.
Right.
And but the reality is, like, it's only going to work if we can be able to guard at the other end. And that might be zone, and it might be high volume switching, and it might be a lot of like junk defenses. It could be anything. We have to see what we're able to get good at. But that's going to be the kind of the environment that's going to allow us to try to play all those guys together.
You said the offensive structure thing, and I always wanted to ask, when you say that with structure, does that mean more play calls, or does that mean like structure and positioning of players on the floor?
Well, I mean it could be both. Yeah. The second is naturally going to take care of be taken care of if you're running more plays, because everybody's in a place. They start in a place, they end up in a place. It's way more patterned. So I think I can see us being a little bit more of a play call team.
Okay.
But I also feel like we have to be a little bit more kind of decisive in what we're telling our guys when Cat's like in the post, or Cat is in pick and roll, or Rudy's in pick and roll. Like we have to be like, we probably gave him a little too much freedom, and guys kind of got in each other's way a little bit. We were headed that direction before Cat went down, and then afterwards we just became this spread team, and then Karl comes back, and then he wants to try to get himself going, and we need that, and he's going to go to all the places that he always has done.
Yeah.
And we just had to adjust to that, and he had to adjust to us. So, but I think that's easily worked through in a good training camp.
I've always thought with the Cat specific part of that, just kind of from coach to coach that he's had, that his primary placement in the structure of an offense was different with Tibbs versus Ryan. Like he was in the post all the time with Tibbs. Ryan kind of had him more like elbow. There's like a lot of 16-foot turn and square type things. Then he was shooting 10 threes one season, and then it felt like, well, not last year, it was just kind of broken up, but the first year with you, it was a lot more of got the downhill game going there with the kind of pump and go stuff. It's great to have all these options of that he's been successful in all those areas, but how do you go about choosing what the primary positioning that you're going to use him in is specifically? Is it about the teammates around him, or just him? Like how do you go about that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it starts with whether he's at the 4 or the 5. So let's say he's at the 4. The easy thing is like, oh, he's going to have an advantage in the post. Well, it's not always the case. I think he's actually more impactful against 5s in the post a lot of times. Just be able to use his skill, his quickness, his touch. He doesn't face as much doubling, not as much fronting, not as much wrestling.
Yeah.
And then at the 5, like he's obviously right at the heart of everything you're doing. In the middle of the floor, he has the advantage to be able to attack off the catch. I think the challenge is, in the flow, like, we can't just park him in the corner and treat him like a volume 3-point shooter, because he's way more than that. Even though he's one of the best shooters in the league, and I think he struggled with his volume. We were like, take more. Yeah. He just felt uncomfortable with that. But it also takes away from what he does at an elite level in this league, which is drive to the basket. And a lot of those drives come against 5s more than they do against 4s. And he can still take 4s off, but but being able to play quickly, like when we throw the ball to him at the top of the floor and just get downhill right away, like that wasn't a feature of our offense last year a lot. He started to do it game 5 in the second half.
Yeah.
And he had 3 and 1s. So, and those are the things that we can grab onto, and, as we go forward, we're like, okay, we need more of this. How do we get to it? How do we create the space? And that's, again, Rudy's got to create space for him too. Rudy has a habit of like, because he's been the only big out there.
Yeah.
He has a habit of just kind of moving into any space he wants to be screen ready. But a lot of times, like, he might be moving into Cat's space when the ball's in his hands,
Yeah, and because Karl, again, it's great that he can play in all these spaces, but it is always, he oddly takes up a lot of space in a way too. So, and I don't think in Utah, Rudy was as much needing to clear that out and like go to the dunker, right? And it a lot of times ended up being that's where Cat was finding Rudy on all those lobs.
Yeah.
And then Rudy's guy is going to come and commit to him there. Yeah, I've just always found it coach to coach interesting how, and it's been very different rosters. Like they played 5 out like completely that first year when they just went way smaller. And that, like you said, when he's playing the 5, it looks like one thing, and it's just basically kind of where his advantage is, and that's what you focus on.
Yeah, and I focus on, honestly, I start with the skill. I mean, he's extremely skilled, so he's a luxury to put anywhere. And just by the menu of places that the coaches that he's worked with before me have played him. One thing I looked at when I first came on board is we need to play through him in the post more than they had been doing.
Right.
But with any five, generally, particularly in the modern game, like they don't worry about spacing. They've always just kind of go where they go. Like Rudy was a multiple screen setter, and he still is. But we may not need him to set 3 pick and rolls in one possession. We have Cat who can get his own bucket in the right spaces. Ant needs space to go downhill. So staying patient down there in the dunker is key for him. Likewise with Cat. Cat would drift to the elbow. As a 5, he could drift to the elbow, drift to the post, play at the top of the floor, and everyone was used to just kind of finding new space around him.
It seemed like when Mike got here and got a little bit more acclimated, that cleaned up a lot of that part of it, right? Because it is a lot to navigate with not just Karl and Rudy, but also, okay, how do we integrate Ant into this as well too? And what does Mike do to kind of make sure you're getting Ant his and Karl his while playing pick and roll with Rudy as well, and then Jaylen too?
Yeah. So let's leave Jaden out of it. Trying to short circuit me right now. No, he gave Rudy an immediate purpose.
Yeah.
Right. A lot of deep side pick and roll. It felt. That's what they murdered the league on in Utah. Yep. So they went right to it. Of course, we put a lot of things in to try to get to it. And then that's a pretty easy dynamic to space around of things that happen on the floor. So we could find naturally good spacing there. I think with Mike, he's obviously point guard. He knows just kind of when to move the ball to what person and who needs the touches and all that. So that kind of helped calm things down a little bit. I don't think Mike has really developed a great understanding of Cat in his short time together, which is
such
normal.
Little time, right.
Which is normal. What I think has to come back is the Cat-Ant chemistry, which was really, really good. And then Cat went down, and Rudy starts playing with Ant in a totally different rhythm. So now Ant's got to have to figure out 2 different things, as well as we got to give him space to do his thing. So there's a lot, definitely a lot. But Mike, we need him to stay aggressive as a shooter off the ball.
Yeah, that when you did the Q&A with Chris, I read that today, and you talked about the turning point with Mike was once he kind of became more of a scorer, and you look at your starting lineup, and you wouldn't think that Mike Conley needs to be a scoring weapon, but it changed once he kind of boosted his shot volume, and that's just the way the defense is responding to that.
Yeah, it was something we kind of thought would happen right away when D'Lo left, that Ant would see more guys sitting in his lap just because they would dare Mike to shoot. But, we saw it like game 2.
Right, yeah.
And I think we were in, I don't know, I think it was Memphis, yeah.
Memphis,
so it was game 1, for Mike, right?
Yeah.
And Mike was great. He was trying to fit in and do his thing and run his offense. But our offense is not like a traditional heavy point guard driven offense anyway.
Right.
So it's, we just needed him like kind of be more aggressive off the ball in all the ways that you can be. So, and he recognized and with our blessing went out and did it, and he shot the ball at an incredibly high level, So.
Kind of along those lines, I've always just had, following Ant for 3 years now, a curiosity of like, what is his progression going to be as an initiator himself, right? And you've had point guards next to him, and then January that was the first time I felt like we really saw him more kind of, the more like big guard Luka type thing initiating there. How do you have Mike here and you had point guards next to him there. Is that how do you have Ant also be an initiator while having the point guard, and how does maybe having a traditional point guard like Mike help him kind of gradually develop some of those point Ant type skills too?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, in our offense, there's plenty of opportunities for him to bring it and initiate. I think at times he was deferring when Mike first came to. He just felt like, okay, I got to a guy that, I respect the hell out of, so I'm going to let him initiate. And then, defenses make it a lot easier sometimes, take it out of his hands or not let him have it back, or he gets it in less than advantageous positions. So being aggressive when those things come. One thing we're trying to push him, be a better rebounder. Get out in the open floor, have the ball early, all that. Grab and go stuff. Yeah, he has the license to do that, as all our guys do. So I think that's like low hanging fruit, I believe. Two is, with all that we ask of Ant, it's a little like his defense. You don't want him to handle for 48 minutes, because you're going to wear him out. And I think he's a dynamic player in that he's able to affect the games off pin downs, which we can incorporate him in more at times. I think he's, catch and go stuff, isolation, which I think he can get better at. Then those types of things like he's doing work without the ball in his hands. And then if we get it to him early, there's still going to be playmaking opportunities. And then the final thing is the cerebral part. Like, how to certain defenses, he's really good at picking apart. For his teammates. Creating that distortion. Other defenses, like, it's still a work in progress, and he knows it. So being able to recognize, all right, what coverage that he's attacking, and in the middle of the game, be able to toggle between. They're up, they're back, they're two on me. They're in just.
It seemed like he got the two. Well, he saw two on him more often this past year. But I felt like I saw real growth in that because he saw that a little bit the year before, and it didn't seem it looked like that's the first time he'd seen it, right?
Yeah.
And it did seem like he grew some of that, right? Cerebral element of being able to read what the coverage is here. Do you think, that is an area of his game that kind of opens up another level as he progresses as his ability to read stuff in that sort of way?
Yeah, we preach it all the time. To him in particular, but in everybody in general. When they put two on you, you've pretty much done your job, Now, what a lot of guys fight, the inner demon of that you have to trust that that's the right play, and you have to trust that over the long haul it's going to create the opportunities. Because when you're wired as a scorer like he is, sometimes it tests your patience.
Yeah.
And when you're young and you feel like you're fighting through it rather than, flowing with it. And those times when he's just let the game, come, and he's making the right play, or he's attacking with force and beating the coverage, and now creating like that second line of help. It opens up. It just gives you this big window to see the next play, and there's times in the game, and we do this with all of our guys, not just him, but you have to be like, hey, this is what they're doing to you, because. You feels like you're fighting the game a little bit, and but he's been growing leaps and bounds in those situations, and I think there was a play. Might have been Sacramento, where he, gets two on him. The ball goes zing, zing, zing right back into his hand. I think dagger three that helped seal the game in the last minute. I don't know if you remember the play or something like. I think it was at their place.
I think I remember that. He loves Sacramento for some reason too.
He loves the arena. He loves the fans. Yeah. And so he, it's like that's what you got to keep trusting that. It's and
that it can get back.
That it can get back to you. But if it doesn't get back to you, he believes in his teammates. So it's not a question of not having the guys out there that can finish the play. But yeah, I always say to Ant, like Luka and James, and these guys are phenomenal players. Trey, they're like offensive microcosms. Like this, like all by themselves, they are an offense. But I think he has the ability to impact the game in a lot of other ways rather than just manipulating pick and roll and making plays out of it. And that's to get to that level where they are. He has some work to do, but I don't also think that suits him best either.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like you are trying to force that to happen. Like if it gets there by time he's 25, 26, maybe that's what makes sense. It'll also depend on the roster and how he develops in all those ways.
Sure.
I always think about particularly for star players, like their contracts is kind of like a different chapters of their career. Right. And yesterday Ant signs his big time extension there, and that's going to take him into that prime window. When he's here. I know you're just his basketball coach, but also a confidant and somebody who's going to coach him in. I mean, he's going to go from being a face of the franchise to a face of the league. And how do you go about helping him or coaching him along that too, where it's not just about what can we develop in your game? It's like, how are you going to develop as a person and all of this too? What is your role in that, and how are you helpful?
Yeah, I think we're fortunate enough that Ant is very grounded as a person. With some of his post-game press conferences, you might not think that, because he's, he'll say whatever on his mind, but he is very, very grounded. And he knows that there's a lot of work to be done. Tim Conley says this all the time. I mean, I remember when we were in Denver, he actually said this about Jokic, and it was just Jokic's second season. He just said, the key to all this is managing the change. All these guys change.
Yeah.
They all change, and if they're good people and they're wired the right way, the changes, hopefully benefit you, and they still stay, some version of who they really are, which is a highly coachable, highly competitive player who wants to win,
It's just shifting from being a college-aged person to a young man, and that is just human change, right?
Exactly.
And your life evolves, as all of our lives were different when we were 20 versus 28 or whatever, and it's interesting that when you're so in, the limelight, and my first year covering them, it's COVID and it's Zoom and it's all that, and you get this, seemingly young and naive kind of kid, and then you get to know him in person, and he is such a grounded dude that I believe that as a face of the league, he's really going to grow into that in an effective way. He seems like the type of kid who, will do special things with the league.
I mean, I talked to him earlier this summer, and I don't want to share too many of our private conversations, but this is a general point that I made to him. I says, there's, alcohol, money, and success are things that make you an exaggerated version of who you really are. Once you get those things, let's say, we all have a friend who, once they get a little tipsy, they're either want to fight everybody because they're angry, or they want to, laugh, or they're either, so if you're and money and success also has the same thing, if amplification of some of your inner demons, or who you really are at your core. And that's why I go back to the first point. I believe in my heart that, he's an extremely well-grounded kid who has self-awareness. Like he'll tell you what he doesn't know. He'll tell you what he doesn't understand. But yet still has the confidence to always be able to pull it off. And it's not a confidence that comes from an insecurity, like a lot of guys have a confidence because they're ultimately insecure. So, all we can do is, we just keep trying to hammer the right messages, surround him with the right people. I've seen an incredible amount of growth in his approach, his habits, his care factor. And that's not to say that he didn't care. He always cared. He just didn't know what he was caring about specifically. Now the work is way more targeted. And his commitment to come back into Minneapolis in the summers, and he loves Atlanta. I mean, loves Atlanta, and he's very well regarded there, and people love him. But giving up his time to come back because he knew that was the environment where we could get him what he really needed, which was, how do we read the floor? How do we read these defenses? This is all about you. And with that, he brought a great energy into the gym, and has had, so far, an excellent summer.
It's again kind of to what he was at 19, and for me, not having that exposure to him, I have been surprised to see how competitive he is as a person. Again, you see the press conference; he doesn't initially give that off, but he is such a unique personality in all the players I've ever covered, and and in ways that that competitive gene in him is not something I expected, but it's kind of fascinating in the cocktail of who he is as a person. In what ways have you seen that grow, or does that competitiveness stick out most?
Yeah, so he's super competitive, whether he takes up bowling or takes up, card games or whatever it is.
He came and sat down next to me when I was playing a card game last night at the table.
Oh, did he?
Very competitive.
Yeah, very competitive. And you love that because that's either in you or it's not, oftentimes, or some level of it is. And he's very competitive. And as soon as things turn to the competitive nature in practice, whether it be a drill or certainly live competition, his ears perk up, his energy perks up, and a lot of guys are like that. Mm-hmm. But I would say, he hasn't done a ton of winning, in his career, and that's just simply because
like high school, college,
yeah, and that has nothing to do with him not being a winner. He's clearly a winner. He's a competitive person who's had his story to this point is incredible, given everything he's had to overcome. And he always has a smile on his face, and he roots genuinely for the people that are around him, his teammates. And like, those are winning qualities. What he needs to learn is just how to win at this level, how to win through the right habits, the right approaches. And it's important for us as an organization, myself as a coach, to keep harping on the right message, but surrounding him with people who can say the right things in his ears all the time. The Kyle Andersons of the world, Torian was very good at that. Austin was good at that. Mike, obviously, is like,
as good as it gets.
As good as it gets. And, and Karl's been good for him as well. So these, these guys are all like,
those guys all have such different personalities too. But I get what you're saying. Or I've seen that from, afar, of they all have these like little different styles of influence on Ant, but but now it's been interesting. I've really felt last year, from what I saw, of now he's kind of doing the leadership element of it too, and kind of putting Naz on and some other guys like that. How have you seen him develop as a leader the other way?
Yeah, so they're definitely taking steps in the right direction. Leadership's hard. Because the first of all, every leader has one thing in common, and that is people want to follow them. Yeah. It doesn't matter what your style is. So everyone asks, like, what's the best leadership style? There really isn't one. If I'm doing something and you want to follow me, by nature, I'm going to be a leader there. Mm-hmm. So he has the personality. People like him. People root for him, but he also roots for others. He's very engaged. I'm on him. Like, if you really want to be a leader, then you got to practice the right way. Mm-hmm. You got to be on time all the time. Like, it's the little things. Like, so the leadership piece that's hard is people feel vulnerable to put themselves out there because you're not going to be perfect as a leader. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to have bad games. You're going to do things, less than ideal. You're going to come in conflict. But the reality is, like, do you have the strength of courage to do those things, take ownership, and move on? And I think he does. I coach him probably harder than anyone in the team on a consistent basis. He takes it. He understands why, and just that alone is a platform for leadership.
Right. You as a coach, what are you excited about for this season? I mean, the roster is largely the same as it was last year. A couple new pieces here. Does that kind of help for you in kind of taking the summer and the fall to prepare for training camp and envision what this year looks like? Do you feel that the roster being fairly similar is going to make kind of the transition into training camp a little bit easier?
I think so. I really do, especially given what we've been trying to accomplish here, and that got derailed to a large extent with Kat and Karl and all that we talked about earlier. So it just feels, to me, like I'm way more at ease going in. With the small pieces that I can take from and think about and work off of. So, and I think you also you see through Miami and Denver, it's continuity that as much as anything, that's going to pay off in the league. I mean, everybody's going for it now. The play-in tournament has really changed the landscape in a lot of ways.
Oh, it's going to be crazy in the West this year. Like,
Yeah.
everybody's going to be going for it.
Everyone's going for it. And so, any advantage that you might have, if continuity gives you 7% advantage and out of your first 25 games, we need to take that,
Does anything stick out as going to be different than last season? I mean, it is a very similar roster, but I mean, I'm not an X's and O's specific thing, but what do you think when people watch this team next season in October will stand out that is different compared to last season?
I think, I would like to think, the offensive piece will look more on the same page. Yeah. I really do. I think I think we found some stuff in the Denver series that really kind of worked, felt good for us and everyone. And that was just a boiling down of a lot of things we did. We way more simple. I think that's one. We still have to get really comfortable with what we're doing at the 4 defensively, whether it's Cat, whether it's Naz, whether we're flipping matchups or we're matching up traditionally. I think that was felt to me. We never kind of put our finger on something and said, okay, we're going into tonight and we know this is going to work because we've done it before and we can repeat it and yada yada. So, in many ways, last season felt a lot like every game was a playoff game just because our game planning, we were kind of, who knew what we were trying. I mean, we knew what we were trying to do, but
the roster was changing.
Yeah, just exactly. Yeah.
It was a constant shuffle for you, I would imagine, of, all right, well, who am I even going to be able to play tonight?
Yeah, and I think, thank God we had Kyle Anderson, I think we're going to see Kyle, probably a lot more at the 3.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that.
Yeah. Lower the 1.
Yeah.
I mean, so we have great versatility there.
Yeah.
So I think he played a lot for us and saved our season in many, many ways. He played largely at the 4. I would say bulk of his minutes were logged there. But now, we have to find a way, for him to be just as impactful out there at the 3. And he can't just stand in the corner because we need the ball in his hands.
Right.
But he might be out there with Ant and he might be out there with Cat, so now we got to let him. So then where do we move Cat? It's so that those things, I'm really confident that we will be able to work through all that. But it's just how do you maximize everyone's talents? And that's my job. So.
Yeah, it's interesting with, because Naz wasn't there for most of the time once Karl came back, and Kyle was such a savior at the 4 when Karl was down. That was once the Naz thing went through and the contract is what the contract is, and so you're like, all right, he's gonna play a lot, and then it's like, oh, okay, well, Kyle now needs to, if he'd slid up before, he's gonna slide down in a different direction, and point guard. It could be. I mean, it really could be that for him too, because seems like the backup point guard position, kind of like last year, might end up being a lot of different guys. Right?
Yeah, it could be, and I don't think it's tonight we're going to play this guy or tonight we're going to play that guy. I think we're going to try and play them all, but they could play in a variety of combinations, right? I mean, Shake is a scorer.
Yeah,
and if you put enough shooting out there and have Kyle handling next to him, kind of fun to think what you can maybe do with him.
Right.
So, but yeah, and that's something we got to play with. I don't know if, I mean, I'm not saying he can't do it, but again, to ease the burden on Kyle and the things that we need him to do, I think his minutes will come down naturally, which is perfect for him. And
yeah, it seemed. I mean, he kind of had the back spasm stuff.
And
a little bit last year.
And also, we just might be just better at less minutes, but still play mid-20s. We're not talking about playing 14 minutes.
Right.
But again, is he going to be the guy who's handling and getting us, primarily into our offense? I don't know. But I'm not sure that's the best place for him either, because you want the ball in his hands early. Why? So he can make the play that leads to the play that scores. So, I don't know. So fun to think about.
Yeah, it's a talented roster and a kind of puzzle that evolves once you take a Karl out and you put a Naz in, you take a Rudy out. I'm really interested to see how that all plays out.
Well, to go back to the very beginning of this conversation, it really is. It's about getting your best players on the floor.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? And the cheat code in the league for the last 5 years is go small, go small, go small, go small, because there's just been more good players 1 through 3, who can slide up and play the 4, the 3, or whatever. And small ball 5 is a term that we now embrace, but it doesn't mean that they're your best players,
right?
And I've always thought this whole success of going small is having like really skilled guys at the 4 who can, who aren't just out there like shooting threes, but can be really dynamic. Like, the Andre Iguodala's when he moves to the 4.
Right.
Like now that's a problem to me, and Kyle does that, so, and we have, between Naz and Cat, we have pretty dynamic 4s. So, our cheat code is not going to be able to go small, but doesn't mean we can't, if a game, I think that's one thing we'll have to probably all buy into. There might be some, situationally, we're going to have to finish games with how we finish games, and everybody wants to finish games, but I mean,
you started navigating that at the end of last season once people are back, and maybe it's about who the other team is putting out there for their. I mean, when you played Brooklyn, I think Rudy didn't close that one game, but that is one of the teams that plays the smallest, right?
Yeah.
And it might have been a different thing if you were playing against a bigger team. That makes sense.
And that wasn't a case of like
he actually played well that game.
Yeah, and they didn't. It wasn't that Rudy was played off the floor by the small lineup. It's that we needed to be able to take advantage of offensively and punish their small lineup.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's one thing, we did a pretty good job at. I think, when teams went small on us, we tried to punish them with Rudy, and not always just like adjust. But I do believe, with a fully formed roster, one of the guys that you could say would be left out in closing lineups would be Kyle Anderson, who was probably our most important closing player.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's when I think about altering the lineup at the end of the game. I think a lot about Kyle.
Yeah, and what he can open. Yeah, and he's not in the starting lineup, even, but he seems so necessary for the closing lineup. Well, just last thing, because we are at Summer League, just what you saw in the first game, Leonard Miller from him, and then also Josh and Wendell also getting a chance to play again. Anything sticking out to you from whether it was in that game or just getting to know those guys a little bit?
Yeah, I think the first thing I want to say is like really proud of our front office, and I think they've done an unbelievable job in the last couple drafts.
Yeah.
And, if Josh Minot's in this draft, he's a top 20 pick.
Yeah, for sure.
And then we get 2 guys in this draft who we had first-round grades on, but, for one reason or another, they make it to the second round. Jaylen Clark profiles hit way more often than it hasn't. Defensive player of the year. Usually ends up as a rotation player in the league. And if you're being taken at 53 and you're a rotation player in the league, that's a really good pick, right? There's risk there, of course, but we have the runway to help. We don't need him right now to help. We have the runway to get him healthy and get him back, and then being aggressive to be able to move up and get Leonard, who they had as a mid-first grade. I think it's just phenomenal to watch these guys around the draft. They're just so good. Tim and Matt and Sach and Manny and Dell and these all guys. They just do a really good job. So I think we should be excited about that.
Yeah.
And yes, we gave up the picks to go get Rudy, but we feel really, really happy with the guys that we got and their fit and their ability. So I say all that to watching Leonard play the other night was pretty exciting. I'd never really laid eyes on him. I saw some of the draft tape, but he made some plays that were like, wow.
Yeah.
Just wow. I mean, obviously the block of the dunk that sealed the game, but he made a play about 4 minutes before that where he drove. He kind of big boyed someone with his elbow, and then he missed the layup.
Yeah, I remember that.
But I was just like, oof.
At 19 years old,
yeah.
too.
And his rebounding.
He looks so comfortable, too, and confident. I asked him after the game, I just imagine that playing the G League Ignite, that just kind of expedites maybe some of that professionalism, or it's easier to be confident, or the summer league stage isn't overwhelming at all. He just looked, for a 19-year-old, physically imposing and like a real adult out there playing. And
I would imagine, other than the draft picks and the assigned guys or whatever, but he's played against all these guys,
right?
So I think that, to your point, the familiarity certainly helped him. He rebounded at an elite level. That tends to translate. When I watch him play, he has great feel, and yet he's super raw. So that allows you to learn quickly when you have that type of feel. Like, offensively, he looks like he can do a lot of things, but we're not really sure like what he's going to kind of stand out as, with the exception of he moves really well without the ball, which we love. And he has a nose for the ball, and that's just offensively, but offensively and defensively. He got, double-digit rebounds, but he had 4 50-50 balls.
Yeah.
And if you've watched us play, we don't get a lot of 50-50 balls. Like, admittedly, it's somewhere we have to get way better at. And this is a guy who kind of plays in that Jared Vanderbilt role.
Totally.
And how much we missed Vando,
right?
Like, how big of a part he was of us. So, yeah, I mean, we're really excited about that.
Yeah, man. He's really grown on me as I've watched more of him, and it is cool watching the G League tape, because you're like, oh, he's guarding an NBA. He guarded Josh Minot for a whole game. I'm excited to see where the rest of the summer plays out and get to the fall. I really appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, no,
and
appreciate you having me. Yeah, anytime. It's an exciting time of the year. Everyone's happy about their draft, excited about their free agency. Doesn't feel like the league is done. Feels like there's a few eruptions out there.
It doesn't feel done to me at all.
But that's good. The league's a 24-hour day, 365 business now, which is
crazy.
Which is what we all love.
Yes, and the league going finals, draft a week later. We're here 2 weeks, or free agency. Than that, it is. Yeah, they've turned it into a machine. Yeah. I'm tired. I'm ready for a break. He's Chris Finch. Thank you again for coming on. Until next time, he's Chris. I'm Dane. Peace out.